Hello, and welcome to the Miami Showband Peace Center Online, a truth and reconciliation platform project. Continuing our Speaking for Myself series, our witnesses today are Amanda Doherty, whose brother Oran was murdered in the Omagh bombing of 1998, and Danny Toland, whose father John was murdered at their family home in Derry in 1976. Our panelists today are PJ McGowan and Eamonn Baker. The executive producer and co-founder of Tarp, Eugene Reavey, joins us from Whitecross in County Armagh. If we can start off with Amanda. Amanda, can you tell us about the terrible event that changed your life and the lives of all your family forever?
Yeah, okay. My brother Oran Doherty, he was 8 years old, and every year Buncrana we had like host families for Spanish students who came over from Spain every summer, and it still happens now. They still come here every summer. So basically, every Saturday the Spanish students would go on a day trip to maybe Derry or Letterkenny or like Omagh or just different places just for a wee day out. And it was very common for the host families and their friends and that to go along with them on the trips. So Oran, he really wanted to go on this trip to Omagh, and it was on the day before the trip. He was begging my mommy, please let me go. She didn't want to let him go. She thought he was really young, but it was, as I say, very common for children his age and that from the families and that to go on these trips. They were always, well supervised and that. And a cousin of mine, Emmett, was going as well, and he was the same age as Oran. So, anyways, he had a bit of a toothache on the Friday, and Mommy was kind of hoping that maybe that would kind of put him off going, but no, he insisted. And when he went to bed on the Friday night, he said to her, "You better waken me in the morning because I'm going on that trip." And she was like, okay. But on the Saturday morning anyway, she woke up and he was still sleeping, and she kind of tortured herself about wondering, will I waken him or will I not? And she really, really didn't want to let him go, but she kind of felt then that, if I don't let him go, he'll be annoyed with me and he'll be annoyed. And she didn't want it because she knew he was really excited about it. So anyways, against her better judgment, she woke him up and he was very excited. And she remembers, Emmett, he lived a few doors down from us, and then Sean, who lived a few doors up from us. They all kind of gathered at the park, and they were all getting ready to go. And she was calling them, look after Oran. And they were all saying, yeah, don't worry, we'll look after him. And she says away they went down the brae, and they were all happy as Larry, 5 or 6 of them heading off and very, very excited. So anyways, they went on the trip. I was working that day in a local restaurant, and my shift finished at about maybe 3:30, 4 o'clock. And on the way out, I met an auntie of mine. She was coming in to start work, and she said, "Oh, Amanda, did you hear about the bomb in Omagh?" And I says, No, I haven't heard anything. God, that's awful. And she says, but she says, Amanda, your brother's there, Oran's on that trip. And I says, what? I didn't actually realise that they were in Omagh. So away home I went, rushing home to hear if there was any news. And of course Mommy was there, and she was, in hysterics, watching the news. And back then, it was obviously we didn't have mobile phones or anything. It was just a house phone, and trying to ring people, and there was no word, and nobody could get in touch with anybody. And my auntie's house was the same. They were all frantic trying to get in touch with Emmett, and then the McLaughlins the same, trying to get in touch with Sean, and it was just an absolute nightmare. So this went on for hours, and obviously as the hours went by, you could hear, you were getting more information from the TV and the radio and that about the bomb, and about, the numbers of people that were feared dead was getting higher every hour. And I suppose then as the day went on, there still wasn't any word. my auntie then got a phone call from a hospital, I think maybe in Enniskillen, to say that Emmett had been in the hospital and that they needed to operate on him, you know, immediately. And of course she gave permission, and her husband went straight up to the hospital. And Mommy then, you know, obviously very worried about Emmett, but a bit relieved that, you know, at least Emmett has been there. So we were convinced that he might have been in a hospital somewhere. And, you know, it was just chaos, and everybody was ringing around hospitals trying to find out information. So in the end up, Daddy and my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, Adrian, and some of, you know, my uncles and that, all just got in cars and they just all went to Omagh. They thought they had to do something, look for him, go somewhere, start searching hospitals, anything to just find out, you know, where he was. And obviously the McLaughlins hadn't heard anything about Sean either. And then there was another wee fella from the town, James Barker. There was no word about him. As the evening went on, we were hearing a few more children, you know, they were found safely or they were in hospital and things like that. So there was a bit of relief there, that, you know, we were finding out that, you know, some of them were being found. But as the night went on, still nothing about Oran. Daddy would ring every now and again from Omagh and say, no, there's still no word. They were in the leisure centre, I think, and it was just madness with people everywhere. And eventually, I think well into the night, you know, obviously with Oran wasn't in any hospitals, and I think that was confirmed. And then they were told that there was like a makeshift morgue, maybe at a police station or something, and that they, you know, were going to take people around, start taking families around there to, you know, try and identify some bodies. And Daddy went in, my husband Adrian went in along with them and identified Oran, and it was just awful. And I'll never forget when we got that phone call. We were all kind of gathered in my auntie's house at the time, and I'll never forget that phone call. Just as Daddy was on the phone telling Mommy, we could hear the screams coming from the McLaughlins just a few doors up, because they had just gotten the word that Sean had been identified as one of the dead children, and it was just awful. And then, you know, you just could hear Mommy screaming and crying, and it was just awful. And I think for a wee while after that, it was just a bit of a blur, really. You know, there was just people everywhere and people just crying, and this was like in the early hours of the morning at this stage. So then I think a lot of just media started, you know, arriving at the park, and, you know, obviously when word got out that these wee boys from the town were dead, it just started getting a bit crazy, and there was people everywhere, and it really was an awful time. Like, it was very surreal. You didn't want to believe it. And even when we went up, I think it was on the Sunday, to Omagh to collect the bodies, it was just very, very, you know, surreal. It was like a nightmare, really. And whenever we saw him for the first time just lying there in that wee coffin, it was just heartbreaking. Just this wee perfect wee boy, and he was just 8 years old, and he had, you know, Oran had no marks in him, just apart from like a wee cut on his lip. He was perfect, and it was very, very sad. And I'll never forget it. Like, in just the 3 coffins drove back from Omagh that night with just hundreds of people lining the streets the whole way back with wee candles, and it was a very bittersweet moment. Like, it was, you know, very touching, but it was also very, very sad. And I suppose just really, even like the days, you know, throughout the week, and that there was just hundreds, thousands of people just constantly coming to the house. And, you know, I think it was just such a massive shock in the community. Like, you never ever think that this was going to happen. You know, you obviously we grew up around the Troubles in the north and that, and, you know, in Derry, and, you know, and obviously that was very close to home, but, you know, you never really knew anybody that was involved in any of that, or that was hurt, or, you know, killed. So this was very close to home, and it was very surreal. And I think just for a long time, it was just, you still didn't want to believe that it was actually, that they were actually gone, and just these 3 wee boys from the one town. It was just awful. So I suppose just I was 20 at the time, and there was a lot of younger children in our house as well. Like I had 7 sisters and brothers, and you know, we lived in a 3-bedroom house. So it was just an awful time. And you know, I have to say though, like my mommy's family and my daddy's family, you know, everyone was very supportive. And I think, you know, only for the younger children in the house, it probably got mommy and daddy through that, to give them a reason to kind of get up every day and keep going. And you know, because there were younger children there and who didn't know what was going on or what was happening. And I suppose Oran was just like you know, he definitely was like the life and soul of our house. He was always, you know, like he was a wee devil, and he was full of life, and he loved having the crack. And he was definitely the comedian, and kept everybody laughing. And you know, he was always, you know, up for a laugh and singing and joking and dancing, and he was just great fun. And he was just a massive loss to the family, and he's just sorely missed every single day.
Thanks very much for sharing that with us, Amanda. It must be very difficult. I can see the pain is still there.
Yeah.
It never goes away.
So thank you.
Like, you know, it's nice to talk about them. I mean, it keeps them in your memory, and you know, you don't forget them. And yeah, it is nice to talk about them.
Yeah, you said that he was, at times he was like a comedian. He loved to crack.
Oh, absolutely. He loved Jim Carrey, and he would often, you know, copy him, and you know, his movies and things that he would say, and he was very good at that. And he loved, you know, dancing around the house like Michael Flatley, and you know, just different. He would have everybody in stitches all the time. He was good crack. Just football, and
he was a big Celtic supporter as well.
He was a big Celtic fan. He was. I think he made his first communion just that year, like, and he obviously, you know, when you get some money for your first communion, he went and bought himself a Celtic tracksuit and head to toe, the whole works, the jacket, the tracksuit bottoms, the jersey, everything. And that's what we buried him in as well, was his wee Celtic tracksuit. It was just lovely, like, because that's what he loved, was his pride and joy.
A horrific experience, a horrific incident, because it was after the Good Friday Agreement. Everybody had wished for peace, and there was an air of hope, and it was a wonderful atmosphere. And then suddenly this happened. I never forget that. In fact, the following, I was living in Dublin at the time, and still am, but myself, and there was a gathering in Omagh the following Saturday, a protest. My wife drove up there and joined with a lot of people. I'm just thinking of little Oran. That particular, I have 3 or 4 grandsons and granddaughters, and they're around 8 at the moment, a few of them. And you know, the beautiful stage they're at after First Communion. They're just coming into the room, and he obviously was a wonderful personality. I'm just wondering how you actually coped as a family. You know, the awfulness of that. I've spoken to people who have lost brothers and wives and mothers, and it never goes away, really.
Okay, Danny, can I ask you to tell us about that terrible event that changed your life when your father was murdered in 1976, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, my name is Danny Toland, and I'm the eldest of 7 children. And my father's name was John, and my mother's name was Marie. I like to get a bit of background to let people understand the type of person that my father was. They married in April 1961. She was 19, my father was 20. He worked as a barman, and my mother was a shirt factory worker. They had their honeymoon in Dublin, and my mum says it was the nicest and happiest time of her life. She said they discussed and planned everything that they were going to do with their life. And the 3 main things they wanted was, they wanted to own their own home, they wanted a large family, and my father wanted to own and run his own business. And thankfully in his short life, he got to achieve those 3 things. In 1969, my father had served his time as a barman, and he was offered the chance to open a business or take on a business in a village just outside Derry here called Eglinton. The bar he was taking over was known as the Happy Landing. And at that particular time, the man that owned the bar wasn't doing very well. So my father seen the opportunity to try and make a go of it. So he decided to take it over. Now, for anybody that doesn't know the facility, the bar was close to an RUC station, and it was also very close to the army barracks in Ballykelly. So my father seen the prospect straight away. If I can make a go of this, I can make a good living. When he took over the bar, he just made subtle changes at the beginning, just tidying the bar up, making it brighter, putting on some new furniture. But then he decided then he would open a bar, a lounge at the back of the bar. It was just an old shed, and he decided to renovate it. And the reason for that was he wanted to bring in live music. Well, after that, everything took off. The security forces, the army, the police, civilians, everybody thought it was the place to be. It was a safe venue for a weekend or a night out or just a bit of crack. And to be honest with you, life took off, the business was great, and everything was going really well. We had a great life. My father gave us everything. We had holidays, just everything we wanted in life. And we didn't realize at that particular time how well off we were. But on the 22nd of November 1976, it was a Monday evening, and everything just changed. Our routine in the evening was to come home from school, and my mum would have a glass of milk and a cream bun sitting waiting for us. As soon as we were finished, we were all sent to our room to do our homework. So that evening around 6 o'clock, I was upstairs doing my homework, and I heard the telephone ringing. So my mother answered the telephone, and within a couple of seconds, I heard her roaring and squealing. So I ran downstairs, and our telephone was situated on the hall. And I remember my mother kneeling on the floor with her head against the wall. And the phone was swinging from side to side. And I didn't know whether to answer the phone or lift my mother, as she kept shouting, "Answer the phone, answer the phone." So I lifted the phone and I said hello. And the voice at the other end said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Danny Toland." He says, "Is John your daddy?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Could you go across the street to the parochial house and ask one of the priests to come over and take the call?" So where I lived, our house was just directly opposite on the other side of the street from the church. So I ran across the road in my bare feet and I knocked at the parochial house door. Father Neil Carlin opened the door, and I told him what was happening. I said someone wanted to speak to him. So we ran across the road, and at this time my brothers had taken my mum into the sitting room and sat her on the settee, and Father Neil took the phone call. A couple of seconds later, he came into the sitting room, and he put his arm around my mother and said, "John's been shot dead." Everything went crazy. The house was, within minutes, the house was full of people crying, and it was just something unreal. The doctor came in and sedated my mum because she was in a terrible state. So we had to calm her down, you know. So the next morning, I got up, and the headlines in the local newspapers and radios and television was, "UFF shot Celtic barman for taking information from intoxicated loyalists." So not only did they take his life, but they were also trying to destroy his reputation. Within an hour, the leading UDA man in the city, a man named Glenn Barr, came on the local radio and television and condemned my father's murder. I was only 14 at the time, and I didn't understand what was going on. But for someone in the organisation, the political wing, to come out and condemn his own party was unheard of. Subsequently, they threatened to shoot Glenn Barr as well, and told him if he ever made a statement like that again, that they would put a bullet in his head. The next couple of days was just everything, to be honest, was very calm, and it was just unreal. People were coming in, the house was full of people we knew, people we didn't know, and everybody telling stories about my father. But I remember on the Thursday morning, my father was getting buried, and after the service we were walking to the cemetery, and I could see a police Land Rover on my right hand side, and it was blocking the traffic so as the hearse could get past. But as my father's hearse was passing, 3 of the policemen got out of the Land Rover and took their caps off and saluted the coffin. I couldn't understand what was going on. You know, why was this happening? That evening, when everybody left, my mum called the 4 boys into the sitting room, and she said to me, she says, at some point in your life, somebody might come and ask you to do something and use your father's name as an excuse. She says, don't destroy his name or his reputation. Life just changed completely. My mum had to sell the business because she was threatened, told if she ever stepped foot inside the bar, any of her family or relatives, that they would shoot them as well. So we had no income. I left school the next year and went to work. And my brothers took part-time jobs. We had bills to pay and we had no money coming in. And everything just turned upside down. But the only thing that kept us going was people always spoke fondly of my father and the reputation that he had, and even people from all walks of life, you know, always spoke well of him. My mum went through a very dark patch. She just, for maybe 2 years, she just didn't want to know anything. You know, just family was the last thing in her mind. She just was just living and existing from day to day. My father's brother, the youngest brother, he couldn't accept my father's death and he committed suicide. And then my granny Toland, his mother, she attempted suicide as well. But thankfully she survived, but ended her days in an institution. And one of the things that always stands out to me is people always ask me, do you ever have closure? I just don't like that word. You know, you live day by day with us. I mean, I've met people, Eamonn Baker through the Hollywell Centre, and I've spoken to people and listened to their versions of events from all sides of the communities. And, you know, to be honest with you, our situation is no different. We're all suffering, and our suffering and someone else suffering is no different. But I feel that people need to talk, regardless of what background they come from or whatever they did. They need to speak about what happened and how they're existing. Finally, I spoke to 2 of the people that were involved in my father's murder. One of them was convicted and was put in jail. He was a UDR man, and he supplied the weapon and told me the whole story leading up to my father's murder. But he admitted that my father was an innocent man. The other man I met by accident, and he was a police reservist, and he also admitted that my father was an innocent man, but would go no further. He just said, your father was innocent and it was just a war at the time. Thankfully, my mum's still alive and doing well, and we've all succeeded well in life and we're getting on with things, you know. But I hope that when people see this, that they can come out and talk and maybe get a bit of healing.
Thanks very much for sharing that with us, Danny. Powerful testimony. PJ, your views on what you've just heard?
Oh dear. I'm just wondering how you coped and how strong you must have been to come through that at 14 years of age and thinking, no, you just maybe into secondary school really. And then to have to sort of take responsibility for the family, see your mother under pressure, see that other external knock-on effect of that violence in your family. And then the accusations against your father which run through, that was some burden to carry. And I never cease to admire the strength of human beings and the resilience. It is sometimes the resilience of children. And you were a child really, and I just would compliment you for what you have come through and the strength you have, and that you're able to go and speak to those people as well and listen to them. So a very powerful story. And it's obvious that it's just still as alive in your heart today as you relive that night doing your homework. And our feelings go out to you at this stage, and sympathy and empathy. You're a strong person.
Thank you.
Thanks, PJ. If we can invite Eamonn to give us your thoughts on this.
You know, Danny and I know each other pretty well, and once again, Danny, I'm very moved, you know, to hear, you know, that image of what struck me is Amanda spoke about the telephone call, and you spoke about the telephone call, and both calls are followed by screams, and you have that image, Danny, of the phone swinging, and you running in your sock soles across to get Father Neil Carlin. And like your story, Amanda, there's all the people that arrives, and the busyness and the chaos, and and certainly in relation to yourself, Danny, I know that you have been almost like a detective, you know, over the years, looking to find out as much as you can. I know that you so much want the truth of what happened. I also know that you don't want people to be locked up, men who are likely to be in their 70s now. But it might be interesting to hear something about that on a day when people here in this city are responding to the decision by the Crown Prosecution Service, not that there's not enough they can go on to bring prosecutions. So there are people who want prosecutions. I'm not sure you do, Danny. Am I right?
We spoke as a family, and we had a HET report done in 2003, and we spoke as a family, and we said that if there was any more evidence ever given, that it wouldn't be used to prosecute the people. They were old men. We didn't want them to go to jail. All I would like is for the story of my father's death just to be there for my grandchildren, my children, and what other children come along. They know that their grandfather and their great-grandfather died an innocent man. My mother, when my father's headstone was going up, my mother said to the man that was making the headstone, I don't want you to put the word killed on the headstone, because that would make him out to be something different in the cemetery. That was very forward thinking. So on my father's headstone now, it just said died in 76. So we've forgiven them. We just wanted answers, you know, why it happened.
If I can ask PJ, as a former senior policeman, a senior Garda, the word truth keeps coming up. Not necessarily people who want revenge or want to see anybody punished, but the word truth. How important do you think that is, that people can get truth?
I think truth is all important. That not knowing. I remember one man talking about his mother being in her 90s when her son was blown up in a bomb when he was 16. And even at that stage, she still wanted to know, that need to know, not necessarily. And of course, the difficulty as well about forgiveness, that whole area, that there are so many books written about that whole area of forgiveness and truth. And I really admire what Danny has said there, you know, that you haven't carried bitterness, it seems. But truth, just what happened, this unknowing.
Well, Danny's story, you know, it's very like my own story in a lot of ways, and I can understand why he says that there's no such a word as closure. Because, and Danny, I've said this many times. If there was a conviction tomorrow morning, you know, I don't have my three brothers back, and you don't have your dad back. So there's no such thing as closure, and it'll go on to the end of your days.
Thanks very much for being part of this, and God bless you all. I hope we'll stay in touch.